some kind of live session. It was fun, but I'm like, I really gotta go. Like I'm doing a live, so. Um, all right, and we are live. So, hi everybody, it's Katie Harris, owner and CEO of NursePreneurs, and I'm here with Jeremy Gorenstein. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. You said my name's Jeremy Gorenstein. I am both a nurse, and as we'll probably talk about, I do some consulting work on the side, kind of tapping into some of my previous work experience prior to being a nurse. I live out in Denver, Colorado, where it's actually snowing today.
Is it?
So I'm resisting the urge to go skiing, but I got a lot of work to do, so I won't be skiing today. But in terms of my nursing career, I actually still function as a nurse. I really, something I don't want to give up. I love my practice. I actually work as a critical care transport flight nurse here in Denver about 8 days a month. And kind of keeping those skills up and those things is really important to me. So I love being able to do that along with some of the other work that I do on the side. So.
Right. So tell us your background.
So my background's kind of a little odd. When I was in college, I was an EMT. I worked on an ambulance and then also worked in the emergency room in the town where I went to college. Was at the time kind of deciding what I wanted to do when I grew up. And, here I am so many years later, still haven't figured it out. But at the time, wasn't, the idea of going into medicine, whether it be nursing or a physician or something like that, didn't seem like a good fit at the time. Just for a variety of things, it didn't seem right. And I was actually taking a couple classes in like public health and health economics and other things that were really fascinating to me, and got really attracted sort of to the big picture of healthcare. I mean, healthcare reform was a big topic back in those days in the early 90s or mid 90s, I guess. And so I really thought like, oh, here's a way for me to like really have an impact and make a difference and change the system and all those things. And from college, went on to graduate school, got a master's degree in health service administration, kind of an MBA of healthcare. Went and did a lot of things in the healthcare business world, healthcare consulting, essentially working with hospitals and physician groups and insurance companies, even some technology startups and some other folks, other organizations, really tackling just sort of unique and complex challenges in the business environment, everything from, reducing costs, increasing revenue, merging, getting out of like difficult financial positions, things like that. And did that for a while. And then, I'll call it my midlife crisis. I was hitting 40. You can tell by the gray hair, I'm past that stage, but got to 40 and was like, this is a great career. And I was doing really well. I was actually doing a lot of work in like policy work around Medicaid and Medicare with the Affordable Care Act, helping various state Medicaid programs. And it was like, I missed the clinical side of healthcare. I'd gotten so far from the bedside over the years that I really was missing that human interaction that comes with clinical care. And as your nurses will relate, that's one of the things that keeps us in it, right? Is the ability to make a difference in somebody's life at 3 a.m. or the most difficult time in their life, to kind of be that resource for them and that human connection. And I missed that. And the business world just didn't offer that in the same way. It was wonderful. There was great challenges and I had some great, opportunities with it, but I really wanted to go to bed every night knowing that I was doing something important. And I kind of made the decision to, and had a number of conversations and things like that, and had made the decision to go back to nursing school and get my nursing degree. Figured, what's the worst that could happen? I could do it for a few years and then do some more consulting, which is kind of just what I'm doing. But I also, to the opportunity to do that, clinical, bedside emergency medicine, 3 a.m, type. One of the things I missed the most was just the people, working with other nurses and technicians and physicians, and that collaboration teamwork was something that I just personally was missing. So had the opportunity to go back and did that for a number of years, worked in the emergency room, was a charge nurse for a while, got through COVID, all those wonderful things, and still enjoy it. But, again, was like, how do I leverage some of this previous experience that I had to work with nurses who a lot of my colleagues were going and starting their own businesses and doing things, but were really lacking the experience, the knowledge about running a business, doing a budget and the financials and all that stuff was very intimidating, because as nurses, you're not taught that. You're told to sort of stay away from the numbers. Don't look at the finances. It's not
tell anybody how much you make.
right. Yeah. And it's, it's a culture clash. And so to go into business as a nurse, you all of a sudden have to worry about like, how much money am I making? How much is this costing? And you have to think through this. That's a hard thing to do. And so I started helping some nurses and colleagues of mine with that. And I was like, hey, there's an opportunity for me here to maybe kind of, again, use those skills and, not take a full leap back into the business world, because that's not what I want to do, but, use my skills to do some other things and help fellow nurses. And not just nurses, but help fellow, healthcare entrepreneurs run their businesses. And so that's kind of, what got me here to where I am today.
Yeah. And that's, so we brought Jeremy in to help us, because that was a huge area in particular for hydration, med spa, even my own business. Like I spent a long time just kind of ignoring the numbers. You see things come in, you see things come out. And then people would say, well, one of the questions was how much money do I have? And the answer was always, I have no idea, because there's a pot of money in my bank account, yet none of it's really mine, or I'm not sure what's mine and what's for somebody else. And so I felt like I was in this fog, and I'm like, I even have an MBA, which is embarrassed to say.
Yeah. And I'll admit, as somebody who works with, I still need somebody to help me with the budget, because you get so lost in all these things. You either hit analysis paralysis, right? I mean, it's like a coach, like a football coach or a baseball coach. People who are really good at what they do still need coaches to help them refine and focus on the different areas that they need help with. And so,
Right. So so we brought Jeremy in to help the nurses really understand their numbers. Like what do you need to start up? Like how much money do you actually need to start up? And that's a big question that I get all the time from nurses who want to start up any business, for that matter. How much do I need? And the answer is always like, well, it depends, which is annoying.
It does, right.
But I mean, typically somebody would need probably, I'll just tell you, when I started my business, which had zero overhead whatsoever, for some reason I spent $15,000 starting up the business. And I have no idea what I spent that money on. Maybe it was like, I can't even tell you. So how much your business is going to start, if you have a clear vision and a clear plan to move forward.
Absolutely.
IV hydration, probably 5,000-10,000. Med spa, probably more, because you need, the stuff is just more expensive. But that's just to start. That doesn't mean you're never going to put any more money in the business. And that's where, Jeremy has really helped us with business plans and showing the nurses. And do you want to talk a little bit about, kind of what goes into a business plan and helping?
So it's a great point, because I mean, that's where, I've been working with a lot of your folks, when it's been helpful for me to understand a lot of what, more specifically people need. When you're doing that, when you're in that planning phase, right? It's easy. And we've all been there, where you get into the fantasy math and the sort of like, oh my God, I can make $100,000 a year if I just do something, right? Because you look and you say, wow, they're charging $200 for a service. Let's call it an IV. Well, shoot, if I can do 10 of those a day, and you bust out, you're sitting in triage at 3 a.m. one night, hating your job. And you're like, I could do 10 of those at $2,000 a day times 5 days a week. And oh my God, I'm going to make $40,000 a month or whatever. Right. And you just come up with these numbers. But that takes time to get to a lot of those things, right? It takes time to build that many customers, right? So for the first 3 to 6 months, you may only have one customer a day, right? But you still got to pay your rent. You still got to pay maybe employees. You still got to pay your medical director. You still have all these costs. And so one of the things that I've been really, I think, helpful and working with the nurses on is really getting a handle on, answering that question, how much money do I need to start? Well, what are all those costs that you're going to start incurring day one, right? Regardless of how many customers you have, what are those costs? And start, getting a model together that says, all right, every month, here are my expenses. No matter what my business level is, these are my expenses. And then start figuring, all right, well, for each service that I do, how much is it going to cost, right? So to do an IV, I charge $200, but does it cost me $50 or $30, to provide that service? So you kind of take that out. So now my profit for each one is a little lower, and that profit has to go pay for all these other expenses. So now we got to figure out what's our break-even point, right? So at what point do we need to get to where we start turning an actual profit? And that, right? Because as you know, you got to build up business, you got to build up clientele, you might have to offer some discounts, you've got to spend money on marketing, right? That's other things you got to do. And so you have to kind of do all these activities before you get to that sweet spot of making a lot of money, which helps you then answer the question, well, how much money do I need to start with so I can spend on all these things to get there?
Right.
And all of this, and I always tell people, right, like there's no magic answer, right? There's no, like, I can't say with a guarantee this is the number, because you're going to start with 10,000 and maybe 2 months into it, you realize, oh my gosh, I need a second computer in my office to check people in. Or, wow, like my clients really want this other service and I'm going to need to add this equipment or these materials to do that. So you're going to have to maybe add in a little more money at some point. But as long as I always tell people, as long as you have a starting point, right? Like it's easier to make adjustments as you're moving along if you know what you're adjusting against, right? Yeah. And if you said to yourself, look, I expect to have 10 customers my first month and you only have 5, you now have numbers that you can sort of measure and say, okay, well, this is how it impacts my cash, right? So I have a little less money to spend next month. I'm going to delay the addition of a third, IV station, or, I'm going to delay the TV in the waiting room, whatever things that you budgeted for because of those things.
That's the hard part, is delay.
It's you want to go out and spend all the money at once, but you got to kind of figure out like, oh, is this a good decision right now?
And I'll say this, because nurses do actually make decent money, and especially now if you're travel nursing or whatever, and you have this nice influx of cash coming in and you want to kind of dabble in the business, there is that kind of impulse to, okay, well, I'll spend my own money and I'm going to buy 19,000 different things for the business. But starting out, it's not an advantage in a lot of ways to have too many services when you first start out. It's actually a disadvantage.
I actually had a conversation with one of your clients actually the other day about, like, she wants to kind of do kind of some soft launching, if you will, right? And have a party and, do some things with some folks. And I was like, she's like, but I got to buy all these things to offer them 10. I'm like, no. Just say, look, here's what I'm offering tonight, right? This service. And, maybe you go to a room of 10 people and only 3 of them buy it. Well, now you have 10 people's names, right? They see 3 people have a good experience. You now have a market you can start advertising to when your next service launches or something like that. But, taking very small incremental steps, capturing whatever revenue you can when you can, capturing, those names for marketing leads and other things is important, right? And just those little baby steps. And it's that, we call it the proof of concept, right? It kind of proves to you like, oh, wow, there's a market for this, right? Like, oh, I tried to sell this IV service and nobody bought it. Well, was it priced too high? Was nobody interested? Did I not describe it? Versus I tried to sell this one thing and everybody bought it. They loved it, right? They thought it was a great, and it's like, oh my God, I need to just do this and not this other thing. Right. I'm finding that with my own, right? I started out, you and I have talked about, like, I said, here's what I want to do. And then everybody's like, yeah, but this is what I need. And I'm like, oh, all right, I'm going to go work over here now. And so now I have to kind of rethink, like, all right, what is it that I need to do to make, to meet my market need, and at what price?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because a lot of startup businesses can't afford, or they don't think they can afford, like a really expensive financial planner. Like, that feels more like a luxury. Like, when I have lots of money coming in, then I need it. But the truth is, you need some basics to start it. Yeah.
That's a great point, because the whole idea of a business plan, right? It can get really complicated really fast. We could spend hours and thousands of dollars doing all sorts of research and numbers and analytics. And the way we've been approaching the business plans with most of the IV hydration, they're not looking for large loans from banks and investors and all sorts of crazy things. We're just trying to capture some of the basics, like, who am I? What am I doing? What are my strategies for doing it? What tools am I going to use, Facebook and marketing strategies, and kind of get it on paper. And then come up with just some really basic numbers around, and even when we're, if somebody's planning on offering 5 different IVs, as their menu, we only budget, right? We just come up with a budget that says a generic IV at this average price. Because we don't know who's going to buy their top tier and their bottom tier. And we can spend hours trying to figure out how much of each of them you're going to sell. It doesn't matter right now. What matters is, are you going to sell any at all? And if the answer is, well, hopefully, right, then just kind of come up with an average. And then in 2 to 3 months down the road, start looking at, well, what are people buying, right? Are they only buying the cheap ones? How much is it cost? Am I making money doing that? Is that okay? I can still doing that. Or are they only buying the expensive ones and I'm losing money? And then you start refining. And that's the other piece and what I'm starting to realize too, is to help these folks is that ongoing, having that budget or that business plan to start with is great. But it's got to be a living document. It's got to be something that you go back to in month 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and really kind of reassess and say, my plan was to do A, B, and C, but I'm doing a lot of C and none of A, and how do I adjust? And so I'm actually, I'm in the talking to looking at starting kind of helping with like bookkeeping for a lot of these nurses who, again, it's a luxury. It seems like a luxury because there's a lot of services that are $200-$300 a month, and it's very expensive. And to do it yourself is complicated. So we're trying, and I'm hopefully going to be launching, hopefully in the next week or two, a service where for a much lower price point, we can get folks just capturing their data, and we can then start looking at your monthly reports and saying, here's how much you're making, here are the different services you're selling, here's how much it's costing, and kind of refine from there.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. And really just kind of another thing that we came across with those business plans was, we had sent nurses direct to business plan before really kind of talking to them about some of the basic things that go into the business plan.
Right.
For instance, like when you are putting in IVs, I think, a lot of nurses think that they're running an IV business, and to some extent that's true, of course.
Right.
But the truth is that they're solving some sort of problem. And if you don't, you're not aware of the problem that you're solving and you're not consciously or intentionally trying to solve that problem, it puts you at a huge disadvantage, because then it does become like, oh, I can offer 100 different drips, and some of those medications expire. So now you're dealing with expired meds and that kind of stuff, and you're not really speaking to any one market. So that is a big part of the business plan, is like honing in. So for instance, let's say so one of our nurses, Tony, she does IV hydration, and the problem that she focuses on is athletic performance, right?
Yep.
So she has drips that she really highlights that are athletic performance. So she has other drips, of course. She's got a whole bunch of other things that they can purchase and stuff. But then her location, where does she set up? She sets outside of a gym. Why? Because that's her clientele. Like that makes sense. And then her business name reflects like what she does, and all of it comes together. And her marketing is now just people coming out of the gym and saying, oh, look, we can go to Infused and get athletic recovery and that kind of stuff. And she has without even advertising, 4 or 5 clients a day.
Exactly. There's a few folks I've talked to are kind of in that similar spot where they're focusing on a particular group of folks. Athletes are a great one because you can build relationships with a gym, right? And sometimes co-brand with them and say, let me set up shop in your lobby, for a certain price, co-market, your new members get a certain discount or coupon or referral. That's a huge way to get started. And to your point about you're not just in the IV business, one thing I have to remind people is, we think about competition, right? People, they look for the other IV services in the area. And I always tell people, if you're in the IV hydration business, your competitor is Gatorade, right? And so, I mean, it's a little, but I mean, you have to think about like to convince somebody to go get an IV, right? Like you're competing against their other alternatives. Now, granted, I mean, you don't have to list Gatorade in your business plan as a competitor, but you have to think about my customers have a lot of options. And so what is it about my service that is unique and special and will make them want to use me versus not only other IV businesses, but just, going in and getting a, Powerade. Because you're going to ask them to pay a premium. And so you got to really kind of give them a value proposition.
And that value proposition. So I had one nurse in particular who her clients just loved her. And she had this lounge where they would come, and it was like sitting in it wasn't her living room, but she had created her space like a living room. And then she would just sit there and they'd regale stories, and people, they would just pay for the IV because they wanted to talk to her.
Right.
So solving like a
right. I mean, it's, people, hairdressers will tell you that sometimes too, that, it's the relationship. And that's, I mean, a little bit of a side note, but, business is at the end of the day, and I'm a numbers guy, it comes down to relationships,
Yes.
and that is going to be the key thing. I mean, I can sit with somebody for hours and hours and we can run through the numbers. But the numbers will just sort of help you tell the story. I use a lot of examples, looking at vital signs, is very similar to looking at financials. You don't treat vital, right? You treat your patient, not the monitor, is one of the adages we would always have. And you have to look at, what is that number telling you and the things you need to change. You don't change a blood pressure, you change other things that then change somebody's blood pressure. And so that's where, if you're not profitable or you want to make more profit, you got to look at the things that you can change to drive that number. And I would say relationships are one of the key ones.
Right. And it's something that I didn't want to hear, especially early on. I'm like, no, there has to be some secret sauce that nobody's telling me what it is.
Right. Find me the cheaper products or raise my prices. Like, I just want to play with a number. And it's like, there's other things behind that number that you really gotta. And that, I think, actually kind of goes to one of the first questions that a lot of people to ask themselves is, going into business in the first place, right? It's as you can attest to, it's a commitment, right? It takes some tenacity, some flexibility, some perseverance. And, that's the hard part, I think, in a lot of, the business plan, the financials, those are sort of easy. We can kind of build those up, but it's having the ability, like I've had to my website hasn't worked for 2 days and I've been trying to, deal with that for a few days and all the technical stuff I got to deal with and all those things. And there's times I'm like, what, is this even worth it? And you got to want to do it. And so that's where, you get the people to help you along the way to do it. But, yeah.
Yeah, because there's certainly some things that need to be done in, I always say that, you develop your problem audience competition, and it's not necessarily like you do the problem, like they all kind of happen together. Like you have to understand the problem, the audience, and the competition. Like you said, not just Gatorade as a competitor to IV hydration, but there's like we had a nurse on here, Jamie, who was talking about nasal vitamins, like spray vitamins. They can just spray them in your mouth. That's an alternative. Supplements, going and exercising, probably meditation and yoga, they're all like alternatives, right? So in order to understand that, you have to understand the problem that you're solving in the first place. So you're solving like stressed out corporate types or something, right? So, what are they doing? Maybe they're drinking too much. I don't know. Like, and then you can go to the bars and, sell your solution. Like, don't want a hangover tomorrow. Like, book your appointment now. We'll come to your house before you wake up or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
So really understanding that audience and how because everybody, like I had one nurse in particular who wanted to work with stressed out people. And I was like, well, that's not enough. Like we're all stressed out. My stress is different than like a runaway teenage mom stress, right? Like we don't compare. You can't put us in the same bucket. There's just completely different issues, and what we would want is completely different. She would probably just want a safe place and someone to help her. My stress is, I need a massage or something like, or less work or whatever. So,
yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, and I think for me, as I've kind of looked at my own business, I've realized that healthcare entrepreneurs. The stress, if you will, or the pain point for them is kind of handling their numbers, right? Like, as you can attest to working with folks who are starting their, IV hydration business, you say to them, let's get a budget. And I've talked to people, they're like, yeah, I'm going to launch next month. And it's like, they haven't even written down all of their expenses yet. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Right. It's weird to say. And one thing I'd love to kind of get into too, at some point is, if you look at the habits you have in your own life are the same habits you're going to bring into your business. So if you're at home and you have no idea how much money you have in the bank and, how much your rent is and, your monthly budget, you don't want to replicate that in your business as well. So, one of the best ways to prepare for running a business is to kind of look at your own budget. There's some great ways to do that. To just really say, all right, let's get a handle on like how much income do I have? How much goes to, what are those things? What are my average costs, for groceries every month? Even if you're not going to start changing things, just getting in the habit of looking at it and understanding those numbers.
Right.
will help you then take that skill set into your business and say, oh, okay, now I can, look at my business every month and say, here's how much money I have to spend versus, you know what, I have $1,000 in the bank, but I need to use that for next month's whatever supplies.
And yeah, I do want to add one more element in here that we don't talk about a whole lot is, we're not, I'm not particularly asking you to budget, but, and I think what Jeremy's asking you to do is just list out the numbers and not put any like judgment or shame to it, right? There's a lot of shame in those numbers, and we avoid the numbers because we're ashamed of what we've done for whatever reason. Whether it's shameful or not shameful is irrelevant, right? Like I might spend, I don't know, $5,000 on something that you think is completely silly and frivolous, but it's all about like what's important to you, and putting the numbers down on paper. What you can do and what you should do is look at those numbers. And which number, like put down real numbers. Don't try and fudge it. Put down real numbers, look at them, and then take an inside kind of like feel of how you respond to that number. Like if you're like, oh my God, I can't, there's no way I spent $1,000 eating out last night. That's so shameful. Like that's something that you need to explore. That's something that you need to work on, because you will, like Jeremy said, pull that same habit over into the business, and then you don't look at the numbers because you're ashamed of what you might find.
It's a great point. I'm glad you said that, because the key in all that is not becoming an expert and getting your own financial wealth, becoming wealthy or whatever, your own financial picture, not fixing that, but just having that honest conversation about what the reality is. Then gives you the ability to have that same conversation about reality in your business. And so if you can put down and say, you know what, in my personal life, here's how much I have in, income, and here's how much goes into savings, and here much, I spend on rent, and here much is my, all these, and we all do it, right? We all look back and think, oh my God, I spent how much on that? Or, I budgeted $1,000 for that vacation. I spent 2,000, right? And you just sort of like, you don't want to talk about it. You just want to like, let's pretend it didn't happen. But the reality is, if you acknowledge, okay, it happened, right? It is what it is. And now, I might need to make some adjustments, or I just need to acknowledge that it exists so that I can continue to move forward. That's the exact same thing that's going to happen in your business, right? You're going to go and spend money on a service. You're going to hire a consultant. You're going to hire an employee. You're going to spend money on something, and it's not going to work out the way you wanted. And you have to like, just be able to say, spent, moved on, right? And make those decisions and not attach the emotion. Or if you do have a lot of emotional attachment to it, like you said, explore that. Think about like what is driving some of that. And I'm not a psychologist, but I think there's a lot of value in sort of understanding your relationship to those decisions so you don't get stuck on them, because you can spend a lot of energy being very frustrated about past decisions, and you'll never move forward because you're too busy worrying about, I've lost lots of money in the past on various other things I've done. But I've taken risks, and I've acknowledged, okay, I took a risk. I made a decision. It didn't work a certain way, and these are the lessons I've learned, and now I'm moving on to the next one. And so, I think anybody who's in business will tell you they learn a lot from their failures. And, failure is a very heavy loaded word, but, failures are just mistakes. There's things that you did that didn't work out the way you wanted. And a lot of time and experience. Yeah. And a lot of times that really translate to money I spent that I shouldn't have spent, or I spent more money than I should have, right? That's the failure, or whatever, how you want to term it. But if you are able to sort of look at that and, and then think, all right, what am I going to do differently next time? Or what have I learned? You then can start moving forward and, make some informed decisions versus just ignoring it and just kind of repeating over and over again.
Awareness is your first step. All right. Well, so, just to kind of recap here, we're with Jeremy, and, he does the business planning for us inside of our IV hydration and soon med spa, hopefully. And he doesn't know it yet, but
I got to catch up on the IV ones first.
There's a lot of them. It's a lot of work, but it's been fun. It's been interesting. But Jeremy, do you have any kind of like basic template for people if they were interested in learning more about how to get started with their numbers?
I do. In fact, as I mentioned, I'm having a little bit of challenge with my website right now. So if you go to my website, which is just mysuccessmetrics.com, it may or may not work at the moment. I'm hoping to have something where you'll be able to actually like submit your email, and I'll be able to send you like just a template, like, form of like what a budget looks like, the things you got to capture. But and then beyond that, there'll be a couple of other, services and things that I'll be able to offer, offering people around simply just helping them put together that budget, building out the full business plan, or even kind of longer term, as I mentioned, the kind of ongoing coaching and support that comes with like the bookkeeping startup. But I would say at this point, I think at this point on the website, you can actually, there's a link to book you can just book a consultation with me. I'm happy to talk to you, for a little bit and see if there's something specific, somebody needs, we can talk about that and kind of get somebody started if they need some specific help.
So. And if for whatever reason the website's not working, just type in more info and I'll have my team reach out to you.
Yeah.
Jeremy. So
yeah, absolutely. In the chat or something like that, just send your email and I'll reach out to folks to kind of get something started, get the conversation started with everybody. But and beyond that, I would say just keep at it, and tenacious, and
absolutely persistence.
Persistence is the key. I'm learning that too.
That's how I got through my PhD. It wasn't hard. It was just painful. It was persistence. It took 6 years, but I did it.
Yeah.
So, all right, Jeremy. Well, thanks so much for talking to us.
Thank you. Thanks for the time.